everybody, welcome to Glazing with Amaco. I'm Cara, and today I am talking about test tiles and how to use test tiles. I'm trying to make sure that everything's going live the way it's supposed to. So I am hoping I can see everybody's comments. If I cannot see them, you can just drop them in the comments and I will answer them offline later. So today, as I said, is all about test tiles. It can feel like such a difficult thing to spend time making test tiles, but it is so worth it for getting to know your glazes, getting to know your clay body, and your kiln as well. And keep in mind that even when you're using commercial clays and glazes and buying everything off of the shelf, that even so, things will work differently in your kiln and with your clay and with your ware than it does in ours. We can try to limit as many variables as possible and make our glazes work on as many clays and as many firing ranges as we can, but we still recommend that you make all your own tests for everything new. So I have, first off, different methods for making test tiles. There are test tiles that are extruded, there are test tiles that are stamped, there are test tiles that are made of slabs. And I do have a video on the Amaco website, which I will link to later, which goes into how to make test tiles. So I'm not going to go so much into demonstrating the making of them, but I'm going to show you some different examples. So hang on a moment. So this is a test tile that was made, sorry, I'm looking to see if I have one in another clay body. I thought I had another one. This one is made with our 11M clay, and it's just made by rolling out a slab and then stamping it and then bending it so it makes kind of a 7 shape. And so it'll stand up in the kiln with a slight incline. If you make them too upright, they'll tend to flop over on their faces, kind of like that. So you don't want to make them too upright. I like them to slant back, not quite at a 45-degree angle, but not straight upright. These tiles were extruded, so we used an extruder with a die, and then they were cut to size. They have a ridge on one side, and they're flat on the other. And if you are wanting to make tiles like this that you can hang on the wall, you can also score them before you bisque fire them. So make like a little dent in the bottom, and then they can snap off of the foot and you can hang them. And this one was actually thrown on a wheel. So it was thrown as a circle with a hole in the middle, sort of like a upside down T donut. And then the donut was cut into slices to use as test tiles. You can also use flat test tiles, but if you're making pots, I highly recommend that you use some kind of upright tile. Your test tiles should always look like the artwork that you're making. They should not look, they shouldn't look like other people's work. You should make them out of your clay body. You should make them, if you make vases and mugs, you should make them upright. If you make tiles, you should make them flat. If you make textured work, you should put texture on them. I found this really fascinating. I opened up our latest PMI, and it had a page on test tiles. Here is the wheel-thrown bottomless ring, just like this. They also show how to make a test tile tray, and I have one here for making flat test tiles. So when I'm using flat test tiles, but I want them fired up right, I put them on this. Unfortunately, these two, the glazes ran a lot, so I'm going to have to chisel those off. But I just make them out of the same clay, bisque fire them before using, and then I can always put flat test tiles where's my flat test tile? I can always put a flat test tile like this on so that I can see how it will look if it's upright. And because they're all in a row, I can put a bunch into the kiln at once, just like that. And this one's small enough to fit into a test kiln. I'd love if you guys have questions for me about test tiles. Please feel free to ask me a question. I am going to be demonstrating the use of test tiles. Here are some of the flat test tiles that I fired on the rack. So you kind of see this is one of my peacock glaze test tiles, and it just went like that. This one didn't run onto the rack, but that's how it works. And then I write on the back of it what glazes were used. Always write on the back of your test tile using either an underglaze pencil or an underglaze that will make it to cone 10. I use velour black because it won't stick to the bottom of things. And you can also use red iron oxide. So get some red iron oxide from your local ceramic store and mix a little bit of red iron oxide with water to make sort of not a paste. It should be thin, almost like a watercolor paint. And you can then write onto the bottom of things. Do not use Sharpie or India ink or any other permanent markers. Permanent markers are only for things that do not get fired over 1,000 degrees. So if you're wanting it to survive firing, you need to use either underglaze pencil, a durable underglaze, or red iron oxide. Keep in mind, red iron oxide will not show up very well on dark clay bodies. It will show up, but not terribly well. If you've been to one of our to NCECA or NAEA and seen the Amaco boards, or if you've been on our layering site, you've seen these cups. This is one of my favorite combos. And these cups are actually half cups. They're not a full cup. See, there's only half a cup. I've shown these before. But we use these for test tiles, for layering. And this is one of my favorite combinations. And it is, actually this is honey flux with deep sienna speckle over it. Isn't it beautiful? It's kind of a really rosy, pinkish, warm color where it goes over the honey flux. And the deep sienna speckle only came halfway down. But you can see how we use these test tiles. And then I can apply glazes in a similar way. So, sorry, I'm looking at my test tiles. I often will put glaze on both the back and the front of my test tiles. And I wanted to show you these to show you what a difference clay body makes in, let's see if I can zoom in a little. No. So this is on the 11M, the white clay body. And you can see where it breaks. It breaks kind of a golden honey color. And this is on turtle. Is that speckled turtle? Turtle clay. I'm not sure exactly which clay that is. It was one. Big turtle. Big turtle. Okay, thank you, David. David's been using Big Turtle in the studio, and so I stole a little bit from him to make some test tiles. And I love how these are both blue rutile, but they look different on the different clay bodies. Not so much where they're thick, but where it breaks, you see a difference. But it's really, really fantastic. Do we have a question?
Regina has a good question. Will glazes have different movement on different clay bodies, or will it only affect the color outcome?
So Regina was asking about fluidity of glazes on different clay bodies. And I have seen some difference, but I don't know that it's a big difference. It may make a bigger difference, not so much the clay body, but the bisque temperature. And that would make a difference in clay body if you're using a clay body that vitrifies at a lower temperature versus a higher temperature. It may make a difference. That would be something to try testing too. But I have noticed if you have a different bisque temperature, the same clay body will have a different response. You may have seen in my vintage gold video that very high or very low bisque temperatures made a big difference in how the glazes reacted, and they seem to run more on some clay bodies depending on the bisque because they can absorb more glaze. But yeah, this is about the same amount of runniness, but it does look a little bit different. That's a great question, Regina. So I am going to talk about, let's see, I do have more test tiles here. Where did they go? But I also wanted to talk about how I also use test tiles, not just the half cups, but I also use some other size cups. Oh, I'm sorry, for tests. And I have tests for lots of different things. So I have test tiles on different clay bodies, mixing things, different mixtures, trying out different stuff. And this actually is a giant test tile. Sorry, this is very washed out here. Let's see if I can't show it a little bit better. Just really wants to get washed out. So I made this bowl and used it as a test tile for sgraffito. So I used a needle tool, a wood stylus, a sgraffito tool, I'm sorry, for Mishima, for inlay, a metal stylus, and then I used a metal stylus on bone dryware. And I felt like the needle tool gave me the best reaction. So these were all, I'm sorry, these were all wax Mishima. And this is quite an old pot and it's been through quite a lot. But it was just meant as a test tile. So you can use different kinds of things for tests. But usually it's best to use small test tiles and get a few test tiles in every firing. And then you can always have some new tests happening. Do you have another question for me?
Yeah, Karen off the YouTube had a double question. How long can a glazed piece stay on the shelf before firing? And her other question is, what is new and improved about Marigold?
So the first question is, how long can a glazed piece sit on a shelf before firing? Indefinitely. I have not heard of any issues with firing a piece that's been sitting on the shelf waiting to be glazed. I haven't. Now, I think that if you were applying glaze to a piece that's been sitting on the shelf for a long time, you may need to clean it off because it may have dust, it may have oils, it may have things on it. But as for firing something that's been sitting on the shelf, I don't know of any problems with that. As for the second part, the new and improved with Marigold is that we have had some materials changes, and some colors have come out brighter than before. So you may find that your Marigold is a little bit brighter yellow. It's not going to change to like a lemon yellow. It's just going to be a little bit brighter yellow than it was before. Most of the colors we haven't seen any change, not a significant change, but we wanted to put the new and improved sticker on so that if somebody is doing production wear and they're expecting a whole run of things to be the same color, they might want to make sure that they're glazing everything from the same batch instead of switching batches midstream, so to speak. So the color, it's very, very subtle, but most people I don't think would even notice a difference. But if you're doing a lot of production wear, you might want to make sure that everything comes from the same batch.
A good segue question into that topic. Jason asks, I recently got a gallon of Chun Plum that says new formula on it, but I can't find any details about the change.
Same thing. It's just been a material change, and the color is slightly altered, but not, it's still within our normal parameters, but so that people aren't frustrated when they're trying to make large production runs and then find that the color is slightly different, we made sure to put the sticker on. But those changes actually seem to be positive to us. Like I said, the color seems a little brighter, so I'm hoping that that doesn't dissuade you in any way or scare you off. I'm seeing a question. David Rorschach says, "This is great. I use test tiles and they take so much time. How do you extrude a test tile? And using black clay, what can you use to write on the test tile?" Well, David, for the first one, extruding a test tile, if you have an extruder of any kind, you'd need to have a die that looks like a T, an upside down T, and then you'll just extrude it. So you'd need to have an extruder, but they do go really fast once you do it and you make a bunch. So we have like a big bowl of extruded test tiles. As for what do you use on black clay, you can either use white underglaze do I have my, yes. So you can use a white underglaze in an underglaze applicator like this one, or you can use a white slip on your tiles and then use the black underglaze on it. So, or another option, if you don't want to worry about it burning out, is you can stamp or write numbers on each of them. So you put like 1 to 200, 300, so on, number all your tiles, and then when you are doing your tests, write down in your glaze book what the number corresponds to. And then you could always put a sticker on them once they're fired. So I'm going to glaze some of my favorites. Oh, before I forget, last week I glazed this mug with vintage gold on the outside, 3 coats, and I did 2 coats of HF9 zinc-free clear on the inside and over the rim. And I fired it to cone 5 with a 5-minute hold. I'm sorry, a 20-minute hold. Big difference. 20-minute hold. It did run, so be careful about that. If you're going to do this, it can run, especially at 3 coats. However, it is absolutely spectacular. Let me see if I can bring it up to my selfie cam. Do you see the color on that? It's really no, it just really is hard to see. It is so difficult. I'm going to go back to in screen. It is, I can't tell you, it doesn't show up on here. It doesn't do it justice. So I will shoot a photo afterwards and post it in the 5-6 group, or add it to our YouTube comments section. But it came out absolutely perfect. There's no blistering, and it is absolutely covered in crystals. So cone 5 with a 20-minute hold worked great. Yes?
An interesting question from Alan. I have seen a mold for test tile. Can I make a porcelain slip from my clay body to make test tiles with?
Yes. However, if you're wanting to make a casting slip, it needs to be deflocculated, so it needs to have less water. So you wouldn't want to use like your throwing slurry. You would want to mix it from dry clay, and there are instructions online for how to make a deflocculated slip from your clay body. I can look that up later, but that's a little more complicated. If you have a mold, you can press mold test tiles. The flat tile that I was showing earlier is actually made on a ram press, and this is actually made on a ram press. You can see it has ridges in it. It's kind of subtle, hard to see since it's white. There it is. It has ridges on it, but that was made in a press. Press molding tiles works pretty well, but rolling out slabs and just cutting them out is honestly it's very, very easy. This is another one of my favorite combinations. This is ancient copper on top with satin matte blue green on the bottom, and I've also done it, pardon me, with a thin line of honey flux where they meet, and I really love how that combination comes out. Really spectacular. And this was just simply fired to cone 6, no hold, nothing fancy. So last combo I'm going to show you before I start glazing is the an all-time favorite, iron luster with oatmeal over it. And this is on a brown clay body, and these are on white clay bodies, and so you can see it's a dramatic difference between a light clay body and a dark clay body. Another reason why we recommend sorry, I'm looking for my mug. Why we recommend testing on your own clay body before you make things. So I am going to get started with glazing. So I've looked at this and I wrote down on my test tile, I always put a lot of information on here. 31 is oatmeal. Is that visible? On this one's a little easier to see. 31 is PC31 oatmeal over PC33 iron luster, 3 coats for each, and fired to cone 5, and the clay body is here. Depending on what I'm testing, I may put more information on the bottom of a test tile. I may use a bigger test tile so that I can get more information on there. And I have it on the back where it's smooth versus on the front where I have texture on it. But I'm going to put it on this mug, so I'm going to get started. Do we have any more questions at this point?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. I'm going to see if I can't. Oh. I'm trying to see questions. It doesn't want to show me questions. Well, that technique didn't help me. So I'm going to do this, and like I've done before, I really love doing these on the outside first. Did want to show you the wonderful foot that David threw these mugs that I'm glazing today, and I don't know if it's really visible in the video. There you see how it has a ridged bottom. So I'm going to glaze
there,
inside
you can see
the foot.
it good right there.
Oh, good. Now I can see it. You'll notice I don't wax. That's okay. So I do a lot of test tiles, and when I'm testing, I'm looking to see if there's blistering, if there's running. I really do recommend making a test tile rack just because it catches any flowing glazes. You could see from my test tile rack just how crazy these combos ran, but they're so pretty. So both of these, I'll talk about them while I glaze. Let me see if I can tip them so it's visible. Maybe not as well as I'd like. Let's try this. There we go. So this one, both of these are the same 3 glazes. They are honey flux, black aventurine, and tourmaline using the peacock method. This one is a dot of tourmaline, a U of black aventurine underneath it, and then honey flux over the whole thing. This one is a dot of tourmaline, a U of honey flux, and then black aventurine over the rest. And so they're both really beautiful combinations, but with that amount of running, I think I'm going to keep them for places where they're not going to run right off the pot. For anybody who did not see the post that I made in Facebook yesterday, in our Facebook group yesterday, I'd like to point out that our glaze production is up, has doubled in the past 18 months. It is up over 36% over what it was a year ago. Now this is mostly just due to trying to keep up with demand. It's not that our production amounts were low, but since the start of the pandemic, our production was not sufficient to demand. So we have had a challenging couple of years just trying to keep up with the demand. Our shipping department has figured out some amazing methods to decrease our backlog and get things shipped out in a more efficient way. And they really appreciate all of your kind words in response to the post. So thank you so much for being understanding, and we are continuing to improve our production and logistics situation. So you should be seeing more and more Amaco glazes arriving at your local distributors all the time. Do we have another question, David?
We got a couple questions. This one from Nancy. I think she's asking a question about how the glazes interact with one another on the test tiles specifically. Mm-hmm. Do you glaze the second layer all the way down to the bottom, or do you stop halfway or 3/4 of the way?
All of my layering tiles, like this one here, I stopped the top glaze, the oatmeal in this case, halfway down. And oops, sorry about that. And in this case, I stopped the deep sienna speckle halfway down. This is a little different. In this case, there's not really any overlap. There's only a very tiny amount of overlap. So this is all ancient copper, just ancient copper inside and out, and the ancient copper comes to here, and then it's the blue-green just up to the ancient copper. So there's not really, the only overlap is where the ancient copper ran over the satin mat, not layered entirely. Does that answer the question?
She might make another comment to see.
Okay.
But I think so. And Karen asked, can I still use underglaze that is speckled with mold?
Yes. The mold will burn out. But if the mold is large, it might cause issues just because it'll leave a hole. So you might want to run it through a sieve or blend it really well. You can add a little bit of bleach to underglazes that have gotten moldy. It will not hurt the glaze in any way, but just a couple drops.
And Nancy liked that answer.
Good. I hope that's...
Regina,
yeah,
asks, which glazes actually do better with a hold, which without?
So I am finding that the metallics, and I believe this would be true of palladium as well, but I have not yet tested it. But it is definitely true of vintage gold, Junebug, and blue spark. All do well with a hold, not a drop hold, not a slow cool, but just a hold at top temperature. And it could be even a long hold, but you don't want to go too hot in firing. So as I've been saying, I was doing a cone 5 firing with a long hold, and that brought it to about a cone 6. If you do a cone 6 with a 20-minute hold, you're pushing it to a cone 7. And a lot of glazes do not like being overfired, so I would not recommend, like, just because cone 5 is good doesn't mean cone 6 is better, and just because cone 6 is good doesn't mean that cone 7 will be great. Do keep in mind that glazes can be overfired and it can cause problems like blistering as well as running, and some colors will burn out at higher temperatures. So but if you're always using test tiles, if you're always using, so I put 2 coats on this, and I'm going to put my brush in water. I know I said 3 coats. I'm going to do 2 because I'm doing pretty heavy coats. And I did do 3 heavy coats there, but it may come out more gray. So I'm going to put oatmeal on it when that's dry. And I forgot, I have one more combo that I really love that I wanted to share with everybody. I'm going to move this to the side. This is actually my favorite mug, and you'll notice it does use underglaze transfers. You may recognize some of these. But this was glazed. This is Nara porcelain, and it's glazed with Celadon mulberry and with a stripe of seaweed, and I love, love, love mulberry with seaweed. One of my favorite combos ever. That purple and green, it's fantastic. And over the underglaze transfers, I used satin matte clear, so it's not like a super crisp black, but I like the softness of it. So, more questions. I would love to have any questions about using or testing. As I said, this test stand was just slab made, but some people do extrude these kind of things. I just make a slab and then add another slab to make an upside down T, and then add my glazes. Let's see if I can pop these off. Nope. I think it's going to take a mallet later. But they look good. So while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm going to glaze another mug with the mulberry. We have.
Jason has a question.
Okay.
If a glaze is overfired and blisters bad, can I refire it at a low temp to heal the blisters? You can.
You can. I would recommend refiring on a slow speed, and you can refire lower, and hopefully that will help to heal the blisters. It may heal them. It may leave them kind of, you may see where they were. I have had that happen, so I have had the experience of having glaze blisters and refiring them, and they did go away, but in some cases I could still see where they had been, if that makes sense. They're not blisters anymore, but they look a little bit different, like a little thinner, a little odd. So you may want to try it. It's certainly better than just tossing a piece out. But you may want to add a little extra glaze to the center of the blister just to kind of even it out a little bit. So I'm putting mulberry on here, and I'm going to put 3 coats of mulberry on the whole thing, and then I'm going to put seaweed just on the textured part. I'm not going to go all the way to the bottom with that because seaweed, as you may know, PC 42 seaweed runs like crazy. Now, we have some glazes that run more, like the aventurine and black aventurine, but seaweed is definitely a very fluid glaze. So I don't want to take it all the way to the bottom. But.
Yeah, and Mary, you might have already answered this with your comments just now, but Mary asked, how did the seaweed not run?
How did the seaweed not run? It's only applied right in a line here. It did run a little bit, and I only fired it to cone 5. I did not fire to cone 6, which most of our layering combos are shown at cone 6. But since it's only at cone 5 and it's just a very thin line, it didn't run very much. I find that seaweed really prefers cone 5 to cone 6. So if you're having issues, if it's giving you grief, I would say go to cone 5 instead.
Regina asked, are there glazes which cannot be refired, and will all refirings increase movement even if unlayered?
All refirings will not necessarily increase movement. Some glazes look different when refired, but most do not look a lot different. But I have definitely found that if you fire something to cone 5 and then refire it to cone 6, it will move more than if you had fired it to cone 6 just once. Probably because of it melting and then remelting, it will move more. So that's something to keep in mind. As for when you refire, I find that there aren't any glazes that I would say definitely don't refire. Just be aware that sometimes certain effects may not be helped by refiring, and you can have wear dunt or crack when refired, especially if it's refired too fast or cooled too quickly. I've had PC45 dark green has dunted many times for me when it was refired. And our lab said, yeah, that glaze does not like being refired. So that might be something to keep in mind. But usually if you do a refiring on a slow schedule, it should be fine. I hope that helps. Was descriptive enough. Do we have any more questions for me today on test tiles and testing glazes? So I always have a few test tiles going into kilns. They're really easy to load around different things. You should always have a little bit going on. And if you make a whole bunch of test tiles all at once, oh, here's my red clay test tile. If you make a whole bunch of test tiles all at once and keep them in a box, you'll always have some ready, so when you get a new glaze, you can test it out, see how it works. Sneak it into your next firing. And definitely, whenever trying out new combinations, you should definitely test before you try those out. I highly recommend becoming comfortable with testing glazes all the time. It doesn't take very much glaze. You know, with testing this combo, I glaze it just like I glaze my big pieces, reload my brush often.
Regina liked that answer, by the way.
Oh, good. So it's not any more trouble to glaze a few test tiles and include them in your firing than to glaze a whole lot of stuff, and it saves you a lot of time and energy if you are firing tests and getting good results and finding out what works and what doesn't, instead of loading a whole bunch of stuff that then you have problems with or doesn't come out the way you expected. So if I can give you any more hints, you can either message me or drop the comments below, and I'll be responding to any comments that did not get answered. And I appreciate all of you coming to visit today, and I'll see you. The next video is going to be on September 13, and I'm going to be discussing troubleshooting with flambe and some of the testing that I've done and some of the things I've discovered for best results with PC71 flambe. So hope to see you in 3 weeks. Have a great time. This has been Glazing with Amaco.